A dying dog hugs its owner before being put down, but then the vet reads its collar and screams 911 now. What was supposed to be a heartbreaking goodbye suddenly explodes into a life-or-death emergency. The loyal animal wasn't just sick, it was carrying a hidden warning no one expected. As sirens blare and secrets spill, one question haunts the room. If the dog was trying to save its owner, then who wanted them both dead? And when the truth comes out, will it set them free or destroy everything they love? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The bell above Dr. Evangeline Holt's clinic door jangled desperately as Greer Whitlow stumbled in, her aging bloodhound Buck limp in her arms. Snow dusted her auburn hair, and her face was red from the biting Colorado morning air. "Please," Greer gasped, her voice breaking. "Something's wrong with Buck. He just collapsed on our morning walk." "Doctor." Holt rushed forward, her silver-streaked hair falling loose from its neat bun as she helped Greer lay Buck on the examination table. The old dog's chest barely rose with each shallow breath, his usually bright amber eyes now dull and unfocused. "He was fine yesterday," Greer said, her hands shaking as she stroked Buck's graying muzzle. "This morning he couldn't even stand up." "Doctor." Holt's practiced hands moved quickly over Buck's body, checking his vital signs. Her forehead creased with worry as she listened to his heart through her stethoscope. "His heartbeat is very weak, and his gums are bright red. That's not normal." Tears spilled down Greer's cheeks as she watched Buck struggle to breathe. This dog was all she had left after losing Rory. The thought of saying goodbye to him too made her chest ache with an almost physical pain. "I think, Doctor," Holt said gently, removing her stethoscope, "we need to consider what's kindest for Buck. His body is shutting down." Greer's knees buckled, and she grabbed the edge of the examination table to steady herself. "You mean, put him to sleep?" Dr. Holt nodded solemnly. "I'll give you a moment with him while I prepare everything." As the veterinarian stepped away to gather the necessary medications, Greer leaned down close to Buck's ear. "You've been the best friend anyone could ask for," she whispered, her tears falling onto his fur. "I don't know how to do this without you." But just as Dr. Holt returned with the filled syringe, something extraordinary happened. Buck's eyes suddenly focused, and with what seemed like tremendous effort, he pushed himself up on trembling legs. His entire body shook, but he pressed himself against Greer's side, clinging to her as if his life depended on it. "Wait," Dr. Holt said sharply, setting down the syringe. Her hands moved to Buck's collar, fingers exploring the worn leather. "There's something here, a metal plate." She unclipped the collar and examined it more closely, her face growing pale as she read the hidden tag. "This is a carbon monoxide alert tag. Buck was trained to detect it. He's not dying, he's been exposed." The veterinarian's usually calm demeanor shattered. 911 now," she shouted to her assistant at the front desk. "We need EMTs immediately. Possible carbon monoxide poisoning." Everything happened in a blur after that. The small clinic erupted into chaos as emergency medical technicians burst through the door, their boots squeaking on the linoleum floor. They brought with them portable oxygen tanks and masks, quickly fitting one over Buck's muzzle while checking Greer's vital signs. "Ma'am, you need to sit down," one EMT insisted as Greer swayed on her feet. She hadn't even realized how dizzy she felt until that moment. The room seemed to tilt and spin around her. "But Buck," she protested weakly. "Your dog is getting oxygen," Dr. Holt assured her, helping Greer onto a nearby chair. "You need to focus on yourself right now." The EMTs attached monitors to Greer's finger and chest, and suddenly urgent beeping filled the air. "Blood oxygen dropping," someone called out. "We need to transport now." Greer's vision began to darken around the edges. She could hear Dr. Holt's voice, steady and authoritative, giving the EMTs information about Buck's training and the warning tag. The sound of sirens grew louder outside the clinic windows, their red and white lights casting strange shadows on the snow-covered ground. "Stay with us, Miss Whitlow," an EMT urged, fitting an oxygen mask over her face. The cool flow of air felt good, but Greer's body felt impossibly heavy. She reached out blindly, searching for Buck. "He's right here," Dr. Holt assured her, guiding Greer's hand to Buck's fur. "He saved your life, Greer. If he hadn't brought you here." More alarms started blaring as Greer's vital signs continued to crash. The clinic became a symphony of urgent beeping, radio chatter, and the hiss of oxygen tanks. Through it all, Buck remained pressed against her side, both of them breathing through their masks, fighting together as they had since Rory first brought the loyal hound home. "We need to move them now," an EMT announced. "Both of them. The dog's trained as a service animal, right?" "Yes," Dr. Holt confirmed quickly. "He goes with her. I'll follow in my car with their medical information." As they lifted Greer onto a stretcher, she managed to keep one hand buried in Buck's fur. Even in her increasingly confused state, she understood what had happened. Her faithful dog hadn't been dying, he'd been trying to save her, just like Rory had trained him to do. The last thing Greer was aware of, before losing consciousness, was the continued pressure of Buck's body against her side, still protecting her, still refusing to give up. The morning's despair had transformed into a desperate race against time, with the sound of sirens cutting through the peaceful, snow-covered morning in Cedar Bluff. The steady beep of medical monitors slowly filtered into Greer's consciousness. Her eyelids felt heavy as she blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room. The oxygen mask was still secured over her face, but the fog in her mind had begun to lift. "Buck?" she called out weakly, trying to sit up. "He's right here," a familiar voice assured her. Dr. Evangeline Holt came into view, her silver-streaked hair pulled back neatly as always. She gestured to Greer's left, where Buck lay on a blanket next to her bed, his own oxygen mask modified to fit his muzzle. They made an exception to let him stay. His training status helped with that. Greer frowned, confused. "Training? I don't understand. I thought he was dying." "Doctor." Holt pulled up a chair, her expression serious. "Buck wasn't dying of old age, Greer. He was suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning, and so were you. That plate I found in his collar? It's a special alert tag. Buck was trained to detect carbon monoxide and other dangerous gases. He recognized what was happening and literally dragged you to my clinic." The words took a moment to sink in. "But how?" "Who trained him to?" "Rory did." "Doctor." Holt's voice softened. "Buck is a certified carbon monoxide alert dog. Rory trained him himself." Greer's heart clenched at the mention of her late fiancé. Rory Talbot had died 18 months ago in a barn fire that was ruled accidental. She'd never known about this aspect of Buck's training. "The police have been notified," Dr. Holt continued. "Detective Larkin is already investigating. They found evidence that someone deliberately tampered with your furnace vent." The room seemed to spin again, but this time it wasn't from carbon monoxide. "Tampered? You mean this wasn't an accident, Greer? Someone tried to kill you?" A knock at the door interrupted them. A tall man in a weathered coat entered, his sharp features softened by kind eyes. "Miss Whitlow? I'm Detective Amos Larkin. How are you feeling?" "Like someone tried to murder me in my sleep," Greer replied, her voice shaking. Buck lifted his head at her distress, trying to move closer despite his own oxygen mask. Detective Larkin pulled up another chair. "The forensics team just finished at your house. The furnace vent was deliberately blocked, causing carbon monoxide to back up into your home. If it wasn't for your dog's training." He let the sentence hang. Greer reached out to stroke Buck's graying muzzle. "I had no idea Rory trained him for this. He never told me." "Actually," Larkin said, opening a small notebook, "we found records of Buck's certification. He was trained as both a search and rescue dog and a hazardous materials detection animal. Very specialized training. Your fiancé clearly knew what he was doing." A terrible thought struck Greer. Rory's accident, the barn fire, could that have been? "We're reopening that investigation," Larkin confirmed. "In light of this attempt on your life, we need to look at everything again. The original investigation ruled it accidental, but given recent events," Dr. Holt spoke up, "Buck tried to get into that barn that night. I remember Rory's brother mentioning it. Said the dog was acting crazy, trying to break down the door." Greer's hands began to shake. He was alerting. Oh God, he was trying to warn everyone. Detective Larkin leaned forward. Miss Whitlow, can you think of anyone who might want to harm you? Anyone who would benefit from your death? She shook her head, overwhelmed. I'm just a waitress at the diner. I inherited Rory's old homestead, but it's nothing special. Just 40 acres and an old house that needs more repairs than I can afford. Sometimes that's enough, Larkin said quietly. Property can be valuable for reasons that aren't immediately obvious. We'll be posting officers outside your room tonight, and when you're released, we'll need to find you somewhere safe too. She can stay with me, Dr. Holt offered immediately. I have plenty of room, and it's close to the clinic where I can monitor Buck's recovery. Buck's tail thumped weakly against the blanket at the mention of his name. Greer felt tears welling up as she looked at her faithful companion. Just that morning, she'd been preparing to say goodbye to him forever. Instead, he'd saved her life, again, just as Rory had trained him to do. The officers will want to question you further when you're stronger, Larkin said, standing. For now, try to rest. We'll have someone outside your door at all times. As the detective left, Greer sank back against her pillows, her mind reeling. Everything she thought she knew had shifted. Her fiancé's death might not have been an accident. Someone had tried to kill her. And through it all, Buck had been more than just a beloved pet. He'd been a highly trained guardian, carrying out his duties even when she didn't know she needed protection. Rest now, Dr. Holt advised, adjusting Greer's oxygen flow. Both of you need to recover your strength. We'll figure this out together. Greer nodded, keeping one hand on Buck's fur. The loyal dog had already drifted off to sleep, his breathing steady behind the modified oxygen mask. Outside her window, snow continued to fall on the Colorado morning, but the peaceful scene felt like a deception now. Somewhere out there, someone had tried to silence her permanently, and might try again. Her gaze drifted to the police officer now stationed outside her door, visible through the narrow window. The steady beeping of the monitors continued, marking each precious breath that Buck's warning had saved. What she'd thought was a sad trip to say goodbye to an aging pet had instead exposed a murderer's plot. Now she had to face the terrifying question: who wanted her dead, and why? The heart monitor's steady beep filled the hospital room as Greer stared out the window, her mind racing through the memories she'd previously dismissed. Buck dozed beside her bed, his presence both comforting and a stark reminder of how close she'd come to death. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sterile hospital floor, and in those shadows, darker thoughts began to take shape. Miss Whitlow, Detective Larkin's voice drew her attention back to the present. He'd returned with a fresh cup of coffee and a folder tucked under his arm. I need to ask you about Dane Cutler. The name sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. My landlord, she said quietly, her fingers absently stroking Buck's fur. What about him? We've been looking into some patterns, Larkin said, settling into the chair beside her bed. He opened the folder, revealing several photographs and documents. There have been other incidents in the area. Properties with valuable water rights, owners who refused to sell, followed by unfortunate accidents. Greer's throat tightened as memories flooded back. 3 months ago, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Cutler came to my house. He wanted to buy rights of way to the spring on my property. Said something about a development project needing water access. She paused, remembering his slick smile, the way it hadn't reached his eyes. When I refused, he said I should reconsider before something unfortunate happened. Larkin leaned forward, his pen poised over his notebook. Did you report this threat? I didn't think it was a threat then, Greer admitted, shame coloring her cheeks. I thought he was just being dramatic. But now, she glanced at Buck, remembering how close they'd both come to death. There's more, Larkin said, spreading out several incident reports. In the past 2 years, 3 other property owners in the county reported similar conversations with Cutler. 2 weeks after refusing to sell, Margaret Chen's brake lines mysteriously failed on Mountain Pass Road. 6 months ago, Tom Weber's hunting cabin burned down while he was inside. He barely made it out alive. The room seemed to grow colder as Greer processed this information. And the sheriff's office? What do they say? Larkin's expression hardened. Deputy Kersey seems reluctant to pursue these connections. Claims they're all unfortunate coincidences. But I'm not so sure. He paused, studying her face. There's something else you should know. We found traces of accelerant in the debris from Rory's barn fire. The words hit Greer like a physical blow. Buck whined softly, sensing her distress. But they said it was an accident, she whispered. They said it was faulty wiring. That was the official report, Larkin confirmed, his voice gentle. But I've been reviewing the evidence. The pattern of the burn doesn't match an electrical fire. And there's something else. Rory had been looking into water rights disputes in the area before he died. Greer's hands began to shake. She remembered Rory's increasing agitation in the weeks before his death. The late-night phone calls, the papers he'd hidden away. He was worried about something, she said. He kept saying he needed to protect the spring, that it was more important than we knew. A knock at the door made them both jump. Deputy Kersey stood in the doorway, his badge gleaming. Detective Larkin. A word? His tone was professional, but there was an edge to it that made Greer uneasy. Larkin excused himself, stepping into the hallway. Through the door's window, Greer could see them engaged in a heated discussion. Kersey's face was flushed, his gestures animated as he jabbed a finger at Larkin's chest. When Larkin returned, his jaw was set. Deputy Kersey feels we're wasting resources pursuing these connections. He wants to focus on more likely suspects. Like who? Greer demanded, anger rising in her chest. Some random burglar who happened to know exactly how to tamper with my furnace? I'm not dropping this, Larkin assured her quietly. But you need to be careful. Very careful. I can't officially provide protection without the sheriff's office's cooperation. But I'll be keeping a close eye on things. Greer nodded, fear settling like a cold stone in her stomach. She thought about her small house, sitting alone on those 40 acres. The spring bubbling up from the earth, crystal clear and seemingly worthless, yet somehow valuable enough for someone to kill over. Had Rory discovered something about that spring? Was that why he'd trained Buck so carefully, preparing for dangers he couldn't openly warn her about? I don't feel safe going home, she admitted, hating the tremor in her voice. Dr. Holt's offer still stands, Larkin reminded her. And I'd feel better knowing you're not alone out there. He hesitated, then added, I'm going to have a friend of mine, a private security expert, do a sweep of your property. We need to know what we're dealing with. Through the window, Greer could see Deputy Kersey standing at the nurse's station, watching their conversation with poorly concealed interest. The sight made her skin crawl. How deep did this go? How many people were involved in whatever Cutler was planning? Buck stirred beside her, his keen eyes fixed on the deputy. A low growl rumbled in his chest. The first time she'd ever heard him react negatively to law enforcement. The sound sent chills down her spine, remembering how the dog had tried to warn them the night of Rory's death. How many signs had they missed? How many warnings had gone unheeded? Detective, she said softly, what exactly makes these water rights so valuable? Valuable enough to kill for? Larkin's expression was grim. That's what we need to find out. And fast, before anyone else has an accident. He gathered his papers, tucking them securely in his folder. For now, focus on recovering. Doctor, Holt will be back soon to discuss your discharge. Don't tell anyone where you're planning to stay. As he left, Greer sank back against her pillows, her mind whirling with implications. The shadow of Dane Cutler seemed to loom larger now, his seemingly casual threats taking on a more sinister meaning. She thought about his last visit to her property, the way he'd walked the boundaries, paying particular attention to the spring, the way he'd smiled when she'd mentioned Rory's dreams for the land. Buck pressed closer to her side, his warmth a reminder that she wasn't completely alone. Whatever Cutler was planning, whatever had really happened to Rory, she had allies now. The loyal dog who'd already saved her life twice, the determined detective who refused to accept convenient explanations, the kind veterinarian offering sanctuary. But as she watched Deputy Kersey's retreating form through the window, Greer couldn't shake the feeling that she was being hunted in her own community. The very people meant to protect her might be part of the threat. And somewhere out there, Dane Cutler was probably already planning his next move. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the hospital window, casting long shadows across scattered papers and photographs spread over Greer's bed. Detective Larkin stood at the foot, his weathered coat draped over a chair, as he connected red threads between pictures on a makeshift evidence board. "Here's what we know," he said, tapping a photo of a charred barn. 8 suspicious fires in 3 years. Each one targeted property owners who refused to sell to Cutler. His finger traced a line to another image, a familiar face that made Greer's heart clench, including Rory's. Buck lifted his head from where he lay beside Greer's bed, his amber eyes following the detective's movements. "Doctor." Holt sat in the corner, reviewing medical records from previous accidents, while Jules McCrae paced near the window, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by fierce concentration. "And look at this," Larkin continued, placing a new document on top. "Silas Kerr shows up as a handyman or contractor at nearly every property within weeks of the incidents. He's Cutler's go-to man for dirty work." Greer leaned forward, studying the pattern. "Rory mentioned Kerr once. Said he kept showing up at fire scenes where he had no business being." "Your fiancé was onto something," Larkin confirmed. "We found these in his locker at the firehouse." He pulled out a worn notebook, its pages filled with Rory's neat handwriting. He'd been tracking similar patterns, documenting inconsistencies in fire reports. Dr. Holt spoke up from her corner. "That explains why he trained Buck so specifically." She stood, moving closer to examine the evidence wall. "A carbon monoxide detection dog isn't standard for fire departments. He was preparing for something." Jules stopped pacing, her face tight with worry. "Greer, honey, maybe it's time to consider selling. Your life is worth more than 40 acres. But Greer was already shaking her head, her hand finding Buck's fur for strength. "This isn't just about the land anymore. Rory died trying to expose this. He trained Buck to protect me, because he knew," her voice caught, "he knew they'd come after me eventually." Detective Larkin nodded slowly. "The spring on your property, it's part of something bigger. Cutler's been buying up water rights across the county, working with some corporation called Voss Enterprises. We found these in Rory's storage unit," Dr. Holt added, pulling out a stack of firefighter training manuals and equipment, including Buck's complete training records and tools. "Rory left you everything you need to continue his work." Buck's ears perked up at the sight of his old training gear. Greer watched as Dr. Holt laid out the specialized equipment, scent markers, detection tools, even a custom vest with built-in sensors. "He's not just a pet," Greer realized, scratching behind Buck's ears. "He's a guardian. Rory made sure I'd have protection even after." She couldn't finish the sentence. Jules moved closer, her initial fear transforming into determination. "Well, if you're staying to fight, you're not doing it alone." She pulled up a chair, grabbing one of Rory's notebooks. "Tell me what I'm looking for." Detective Larkin spread more documents across the bed. "We need to establish a pattern. Dates, times, witnesses. Anything that connects Cutler and Kerr to these incidents." For the next few hours, they worked methodically. Dr. Holt applied her analytical mind to medical records, finding suspicious similarities in injury patterns. Jules used her local knowledge to identify properties and timeline connections. Greer immersed herself in Rory's notes, her heart aching at his familiar handwriting but strengthened by his foresight. Buck remained alert throughout, occasionally growling when hospital staff passed too close to the door. His training was showing through more clearly now, the way he positioned himself between Greer and potential threats, his attention to suspicious sounds, his immediate response to command words they found in Rory's training logs. "Look at this," Greer said suddenly, holding up a page from Rory's notebook. He mapped the underground water table. "The spring on my land. It's not just a surface water source. It's connected to an entire aquifer system." Larkin leaned in, his expression grave. "That's why Cutler's so desperate. Control your spring. Control the whole water supply," Dr. Holt finished. "And with drought conditions worsening, water rights become gold," Jules added grimly. Greer sat back, her mind racing. "So we fight back. We use everything Rory left us. Buck's training, the evidence he gathered, and his firefighter contacts." She looked around at her unlikely allies, the determined detective, the compassionate veterinarian, the loyal friend, and the brave dog who'd already saved her life. "It won't be safe," Larkin warned. "Cutler's already shown he's willing to kill." "I know," Greer answered, her voice steady. "But Rory believed this was worth dying for. The least I can do is prove it's worth living for." Dr. Holt stepped forward, her practical nature asserting itself. "You'll need a secure base of operations. My clinic has spare rooms, security systems, and plenty of space for Buck's equipment. And I've got connections all over town," Jules added. "People talk to waitresses. I can help gather information." Greer looked down at Buck, who gazed back with unwavering loyalty. She reached for his training vest, running her fingers over the specialized pockets and sensors. "We'll need to refresh your training, boy. Show me everything Rory taught you." The afternoon light was fading now, casting long shadows across their impromptu war room of evidence and plans. But for the first time since Buck's collapse had revealed the attempt on her life, Greer felt something beyond fear. She felt purpose. They gathered Buck's equipment, Rory's manuals, and all their collected evidence. Each piece was another thread connecting them to the truth, another tool in their arsenal against Cutler's schemes. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice, about finishing what Rory had started. "Tomorrow," Greer said, her voice firm, "we start training. Everything Buck knows, everything Rory documented, everything we can prove about Cutler and Kerr, we use it all." The others nodded, their commitment matching hers. As they prepared to leave, Buck pressed against her leg, alert and ready. In his eyes, Greer saw not just protection but partnership. Together, they would honor Rory's memory by bringing the truth to light. The morning sun had barely touched the frost-covered ground when Deputy Kersey's patrol car pulled into Greer's driveway, its tires crunching over frozen gravel. Buck's low growl drew her attention to the window, where she watched the deputy swagger toward her front door, a stack of papers clutched in his hand. "Miss Whitlow," his sharp knock rattled the screen door. "County business. Open up." Greer's stomach tightened as she opened the door. Buck pressed against her leg. Deputy Kersey's smirk told her everything she needed to know about this visit. "Got some citations here," he drawled, thumbing through the papers. "Unlicensed guard dog, improper animal restraint, health code violations." He paused, eyes glinting. "Going to need to take the dog into custody." "Buck's properly licensed and trained," Greer protested, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I have all his paperwork not according to these complaints." Kersey cut her off, shoving the papers at her. "Mr. Cutler's been very concerned about aggressive dog behavior on neighboring properties." Buck's growl deepened as two animal control officers approached from behind Kersey. Greer's hands trembled as she scanned the citations, each one more ridiculous than the last. "This is harassment," she said, stepping in front of Buck. "Detective Larkin isn't here," Kersey finished. "But I am, and I've got orders to remove that animal." He nodded to the officers, who moved forward with a catchpole. Buck barked once, sharp and warning. Greer felt tears burning in her eyes as they forced the loop around his neck. "Please," she begged. "He's all I have left of." "Should have thought about that before letting him run wild," Kersey sneered. "You can appeal at the hearing next month, if he hasn't been deemed dangerous and put down by then." Greer watched helplessly as they loaded Buck into their van, his desperate howls tearing at her heart. The citations crumpled in her fist as Kersey's patrol car disappeared down her driveway, followed by animal control. She spent hours on the phone, with Detective Larkin's office, with Dr. Holt, with anyone who might help. But it was evening before she finally gave up, exhausted and scared. She had to get supplies into town, had to figure out how to fight this legally. The road into town wound through deep shadows as sunset painted the sky in bitter winter colors. Greer kept checking her rearview mirror, paranoia making every set of headlights seem threatening. She was halfway to town when she saw the pickup truck racing up behind her. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel as the truck swerved into the oncoming lane, then jerked alongside her. Through the passenger window, she caught a glimpse of Silas Kerr's pockmarked face, twisted in a cruel grin. The first impact sent her car scraping against the guardrail. Sparks flew as metal screamed against metal. Greer fought to maintain control as Silas rammed her again, harder this time. Her tires lost grip on the icy pavement. The world spun. Glass shattered. Her car hit the guardrail at an angle and flipped, rolling once before landing on its side in the shallow gulch beside the road. Cold air rushed in through the broken windows as Greer hung suspended by her seatbelt, dazed and bleeding from cuts on her face. Heavy boots crunched on broken glass. "Should have sold when you had the chance." Silas's voice came from above. "Now we do this the hard way." A familiar bark cut through the night. Through her blurred vision, Greer saw a large shape launch through the broken rear window. Buck, somehow free, somehow here, slammed into Silas with the full force of his training. The man screamed as powerful jaws clamped onto his arm. "Buck!" Greer's voice cracked as she fumbled with her seatbelt. "Hold!" The dog obeyed, keeping Silas pinned as Greer crawled out through the shattered windshield. Her whole body screamed in protest, but survival instinct drove her forward. She stumbled down the steep embankment, away from the road. "Buck, come!" The dog released Silas and bounded after her. Behind them, Silas's curses mixed with the sound of approaching vehicles. Greer pushed through thick brush, Buck staying close to her side. The frozen creek bed offered some cover as they moved deeper into the gulch. They huddled together in the darkness, Greer shaking from cold and shock while Buck stood guard. Above them, voices carried on the wind, Silas calling for backup, the sound of vehicles stopping. The beam of flashlights swept the gulch, but the thick brush kept them hidden. Hours passed before the sounds faded. Greer buried her face in Buck's fur, grateful for his warmth and protection. Somehow, he'd escaped. Somehow, he'd found her. But the night's events had made one thing crystal clear. Cutler wouldn't stop until he had what he wanted. Her land, her silence, maybe even her life. Buck's quiet whine drew her attention to a cut on his paw, likely from the broken glass. Greer tore a strip from her jacket to bind it, her hands still trembling. "Good boy," she whispered, touching her forehead to his. "Such a good, brave boy." They stayed hidden until false dawn began to lighten the sky. Every sound made Greer flinch. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. But Buck's steady presence kept her grounded, kept her moving despite her injuries and exhaustion. When they finally emerged from the gulch, miles from where her car had crashed, Greer knew they couldn't go home. Cutler had shown his hand, first taking Buck through legal manipulation, then trying to eliminate her when that didn't work. The game had changed, and the stakes were life and death. Buck pressed against her leg, offering support as she limped along the road's shoulder. His training vest was torn, but the loyal dog had never looked more like the guardian Rory had trained him to be. Together, they walked toward the rising sun, battered but alive, each step taking them further from the ambush that had nearly claimed their lives. In the dim light of dawn, Greer found refuge at Dr. Holt's clinic, sneaking in through the back door with Buck. Her hands shook as she cleaned the dried blood from Buck's injured paw. The loyal dog whimpered softly but stayed still, his amber eyes never leaving her face. "We need to check you over properly, boy," Greer murmured, running her fingers through his fur to check for other injuries. As she adjusted his collar, something felt odd. A slight bulge in the leather lining she'd never noticed before. Frowning, Greer carefully examined the collar. There, hidden in a small pocket sewn into the inside, was a key. Small and brass, it looked old but well maintained. Her heart pounded as she recognized it. The key to Rory's old toolbox, the one she'd never been able to open after his death. "Buck," she whispered, her voice breaking. "What else have you been carrying all this time?" The toolbox was still in her truck, which she'd left at home the night before. With trembling fingers, she dialed Jules McCrae's number. "Jules, I need a favor. Can you get to my place and bring me Rory's red toolbox from the garage? It's important." 20 minutes later, Jules arrived with the battered red box. Greer's hands shook as she inserted the key. The lock turned with a soft click. Inside, beneath layers of old tools and papers, she found a small digital recorder. Her breath caught in her throat as she pressed play. Rory's voice filled the room, and tears sprang to her eyes. "If you're hearing this, something's happened to me. I've uncovered something big, something dangerous. There was urgency in his familiar tone. Dane Cutler isn't working alone. He's fronting for Marta Voss, the CEO of Crystal Pure Bottling. They're systematically buying up water rights across the county, using whatever means necessary. Greer's hand flew to her mouth as Rory continued. I've documented everything, the threats, the suspicious accidents, the forced sales. But Silas Kerr is the key. He's Cutler's enforcer, and I've tracked him to at least 3 fires that cleared properties Voss wanted. I'm meeting him tonight. He doesn't know I'm wearing a wire. The recording crackled with movement, then Silas's distinctive voice emerged. Should have stayed out of it. Talbot. I know about the fires, Silas. About Voss. Pulling Cutler's strings. Ain't gonna matter what you know after tonight. The sound of a struggle followed. Then the recording went dead. Greer sat frozen, Buck's head heavy in her lap as the truth sank in. Rory hadn't died in an accident. He'd been murdered, trying to expose the very people now coming after her. Jules, who had been listening silently, spoke first. Oh, Greer, we need to get this to Detective Larkin right now. They killed him, Greer said, her voice hollow. They killed him, and they made it look like an accident. And Buck, she looked down at the dog, who gazed back with knowing eyes. Buck's been carrying this evidence all along. Rory must have hidden the key just before. Her voice broke. Buck pressed closer, offering comfort as he'd done countless times since Rory's death. Now she understood why he'd been so protective, why he'd seemed to stand guard even when there was no apparent threat. He'd been carrying out his final mission from Rory, protecting both the evidence and her. The fire that killed Rory, Greer continued, anger replacing grief in her voice. It wasn't random. Silas said it because Rory was getting too close to the truth about Voss and Cutler. And now they're trying to force me off my land for the same reason, the spring water rights. Jules paced the small exam room. But why go to such lengths? Why not just offer more money? Because it's not just about my spring, Greer realized. Rory's recording mentioned multiple properties. They're building something bigger. Probably trying to control all the water rights in the county. My land must be a crucial piece. Buck's ears suddenly perked up, and he growled softly. Moments later, they heard footsteps in the clinic's front office. Dr. Holt? A familiar voice called. You in yet? Detective Larkin, Greer breathed in relief. She grabbed the recorder and hurried to the front, Buck limping slightly beside her. The detective's eyes widened at their appearance. Greer still covered in cuts and bruises from the crash, Buck's paw bandaged. What happened to you two? Silas Kerr ran us off the road last night, Greer said, holding out the recorder. But that's not all. Listen to this. It's Rory's voice, recorded the night he died. He found proof that Cutler and Marta Voss are behind everything, including his murder. Larkin's face grew grave as he listened to the recording. When it finished, he pulled out his phone. I'm calling in backup and putting you both in protective custody. This is the evidence we needed, not just for last night's attack, but to reopen Rory's case. As the detective made his calls, Greer sank down beside Buck, her hand finding his collar, the simple leather band that had carried such crucial evidence for so long. The dog leaned against her, steady and strong despite his injury, just as he'd been since the night Rory died. You did it, boy, she whispered, touching her forehead to his. You kept Rory's last message safe until I could find it. You helped us expose the truth. Buck's tail thumped once against the floor, and his eyes seemed to hold all the wisdom and loyalty of his years of service. He'd been more than just a pet, or even a service dog. He'd been the keeper of Rory's final testimony, a silent guardian waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth that would bring justice for his fallen handler. Detective Larkin wasted no time. Within hours of discovering Rory's recording, he had contacted the state fire marshal's office. The evidence was too significant to keep local, especially given the suspicious behavior of certain deputies. Greer sat in the police station's conference room, watching through the window as officials came and went. Buck lay at her feet, refusing to leave her side even when offered water from the friendly desk sergeant. The dog's loyalty touched her deeply, especially now that she understood the full weight of his mission. The fire marshal's sending a Differos team, Larkin announced, returning with fresh coffee. They're reopening Rory's case as a potential homicide. The recording changes everything. Greer wrapped her hands around the warm cup. What about Cutler and Voss? We're building the case carefully. Voss has connections, and Larkin was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. 3 people in expensive suits strode in, led by a sharp-featured woman who introduced herself as Gloria Chen, legal counsel for Marta Voss Enterprises. We understand you're making some very serious allegations against our client, she stated, placing a thick envelope on the table. This cease and desist order requires you to surrender any illegally obtained recordings and cease all defamatory statements. Larkin didn't touch the envelope. Any communications should go through the district attorney's office. Miss Whitlow. Chen turned to Greer, her voice honey-sweet but threatening. My client is prepared to be generous. A settlement that would secure your future. In exchange for sens, in exchange for helping cover up my fiancé's murder? Greer's voice shook with anger. Not interested. The lawyers left with thinly veiled threats of legal action, but Greer hardly heard them. Her phone was buzzing with a text from her sister Lark. The teenager was supposed to be at play practice, but the message made Greer's blood run cold. Help. Cutler. Spring House. Buck sensed her distress immediately, rising with a low growl. Larkin leaned over to see the phone and immediately reached for his radio, but Greer's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a photo of Lark, bound and terrified, in what looked like the old spring house on Greer's property. Below it was a message from Cutler. Spring rights signed over by dawn, or she suffocates. Come alone to the spring house. No cops, or she dies first. No, Greer whispered, her hands shaking. No, no, no. We'll get a tactical team, Larkin started, but Greer shook her head violently. He'll see them coming. The spring house is on high ground, and there's only one road in. She knew the territory intimately. The spring house sat on the highest point of her property, overlooking the valley. An old stone building that had once housed the pumping equipment for the natural spring beneath it. He'll kill her before anyone gets close. Buck whined softly, pressing against her leg. The dog's presence steadied her, and suddenly she remembered something from Rory's firefighter manuals, something about the old spring house's construction. Wait, she said, her mind racing. I have an idea, but I'll need your help, and Buck's. Over the next hour, as the sun began to set, they formed a plan. It was dangerous, but it might be their only chance. Larkin didn't like it, but he understood they were out of options. The minute you're in position, he told her, checking his weapon, we move. Don't try to be a hero. Greer knelt beside Buck, checking the special vest they'd fitted him with. You remember the way through the tunnels, don't you, boy? The dog's training as a rescue animal had included learning to navigate confined spaces. The old maintenance tunnels under the spring house had been part of his training ground with Rory. Buck's steady gaze told her he understood. He always understood. As darkness fell, Greer drove her truck up the winding road to the spring house. Her headlights caught the old stone walls, and she could see Cutler's expensive SUV parked near the entrance. Her phone buzzed one more time. Come in alone. Papers are ready for your signature. Greer took a deep breath and stepped out of her truck. The night was cold and clear. Stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. Somewhere in the darkness, Larkin and his trusted deputies were getting into position. And below the spring house, in the old maintenance tunnels, Buck was already moving silently through the darkness, remembering every step of his training with Rory. She walked toward the spring house, her footsteps crunching on frozen gravel. The old wooden door creaked as she pushed it open, and the smell of damp stone and rust hit her nose. Cutler stood in the center of the single room, looking perfectly calm in his expensive rancher's coat. Lark was tied to one of the old pipes, a gag in her mouth, her eyes wide with fear. There she is, Cutler said smoothly. The stubborn Miss Whitlow, finally ready to be reasonable. Greer fought to keep her voice steady. Let her go, Dane. She's just a kid. Sign first. He gestured to papers on an old work table. Everything's in order. Just your signature, and this all goes away. Below their feet, unheard through the stone floor, Buck was positioning himself exactly where Rory had trained him years ago. The dog remembered every detail, the weak point in the floor, the old access panel, the signal he was waiting for. The trap was set. Now they just had to spring it before dawn, and before Cutler realized he wasn't the only one with a plan. Greer stepped closer to the work table, her fingers trembling as she reached for the papers. The old spring house creaked around them, stone walls holding decades of secrets. Lark's muffled whimpers echoed in the cramped space. "You really thought I wouldn't check the signatures?" Cutler suddenly sneered, snatching the papers she'd prepared. "These aren't my lawyer's documents. You're trying to play me, Greer." A metallic clang rang out as Silas emerged from the shadows, dropping a heavy metal canister. The sharp hiss of gas filled the air. Greer's eyes widened as she recognized the sound from her near-death experience at home: carbon monoxide. "No!" She lunged toward Lark, but Cutler blocked her path. "You had your chance to do this easy," he said, backing toward the door. "Now we do it my way." Outside, Larkin and his deputies were moving into position when an explosion of flames erupted across the spring house entrance. Silas had doused the doorway with accelerant, trapping Greer and Lark inside with the deadly gas. Smoke began seeping through the wooden doorframe as flames licked up the walls. The heat was intense, but worse was the invisible threat of the carbon monoxide filling the chamber. Greer could already feel her head getting fuzzy. A scratching sound came from below, followed by splintering wood. Buck burst through a rotting section of floorboard, dragging something in his mouth, one of Rory's old rescue ropes, stored in the tunnel system below. The dog stumbled, clearly affected by the gas and smoke, but managed to drop the rope at Greer's feet before collapsing. "Buck!" Greer's heart tore in two directions. Her loyal dog lay gasping on one side, her sister bound and choking on the other. The smoke was getting thicker, and she could feel the deadly gas taking effect. She had to choose, and fast. Rory's training notes flashed through her mind. In a toxic environment, follow procedure. Wet the floor, stay low, secure your line. Extract victims one at a time. Fighting against her spinning head, Greer grabbed a rusty bucket and lurched to the spring tap. Water still flowed, thank God. She splashed it across the wooden sections of floor, trying to slow the fire's spread. Then she grabbed the rope Buck had brought. "I'm so sorry, boy," she whispered to Buck as she crawled past him to reach Lark. The rope was their only chance, and her sister had to come first. Her trembling fingers worked to tie the rescue knot Rory had shown her years ago. Lark's eyes were rolling back, the combination of smoke and gas overwhelming her. Greer's own vision was starting to blur, but she forced herself to focus on the knots. The rope had to be secure, their lives depended on it. "Stay with me, Lark," she pleaded, finally getting the rope around her sister's chest. Her fingers, clumsy from the gas, worked to untie Lark's bonds. The teenager slumped against her, barely conscious. The smoke was now a thick blanket above them. Greer could hear shouts outside, the sound of water hitting stone, but the flames still blocked their exit. She had to get Lark to the tunnel entrance Buck had revealed. Dragging her sister's limp form across the wet floor, Greer fought against her own fading consciousness. The hole Buck had come through seemed miles away, though it was only a few feet. Behind them, Buck wheezed, still unable to rise. The rope trailed behind them like a lifeline. In the tunnels below, Greer knew Larkin's deputies would be waiting to pull them to safety. But first, she had to get Lark through that hole. The teenager was dead weight in her arms. Greer's muscles screamed as she maneuvered her sister toward the opening. The smoke was now so thick she could barely see, and each breath felt like swallowing fire. But she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when they were so close. With one final surge of desperate strength, Greer pushed Lark's unconscious form through the hole in the floor. She heard voices below, felt the rope go taut as the deputies began pulling her sister to safety. Now for Buck. But as Greer turned back toward her faithful dog, her vision swam. The carbon monoxide was winning. Her legs buckled, and she fell to her knees beside Buck's still form. The dog's eyes met hers, filled with the same unwavering loyalty that had saved her life so many times before. "Please," she whispered, trying to wrap her arms around him. "Please get up, Buck. Please." The smoke swirled around them like a shroud as Greer fought to stay conscious, her body draped protectively over the dog who had given everything to save them both. Through the haze, she could hear shouting, feel the vibration of footsteps, but the darkness was closing in fast. Her last thought before consciousness slipped away was of Rory, and how he would be proud of them both, his loyal dog and the woman he'd loved, fighting to the very end. The freezing mountain air hit Greer's lungs like needles as she stumbled out of the spring house. Through bleary eyes, she saw Dr. Holt hunched over Buck's still form on the snowy ground. The vet's hands moved with desperate precision, administering oxygen and checking vital signs. "Come on, old friend, doctor," Holt murmured, her breath visible in the cold air. "Fight for us one more time." Movement caught Greer's attention. Cutler was making a break for the wooden bridge spanning the gorge. Despite her burning lungs and the soot coating her throat, Greer pushed herself forward. Her boots crunched in the snow as she pursued him. "Stop right there," she shouted, her voice raw from the smoke. Cutler spun around on the bridge, his face twisted with desperate fury. "You should have died in there, just like your nosy fiancé." He lunged at her, trying to force her over the railing. But Greer was ready. Using the defensive stance Rory had taught her during fire training, she shifted her weight and redirected Cutler's momentum. He stumbled, crashing into the wooden railing. The old board splintered. Cutler went over, barely managing to grab the edge. Now he dangled above the rocky gorge, his feet kicking in empty air. "Help me," he pleaded, real fear replacing his earlier swagger. "Please." Greer's hands shook with rage as she looked down at him. This was the man who had murdered Rory, who had tried to kill her and her sister. But Rory's voice echoed in her memory. "We save lives, no matter who they belong to." She reached down and grabbed Cutler's wrist, just as Larkin arrived, gun drawn. "I've got him," the detective said, holstering his weapon and helping Greer pull Cutler to safety. He immediately slapped handcuffs on the gasping man. Nearby, shouts erupted as other officers tackled Silas, who had tried to flee through the woods. One of them held up a phone, calling out, "Detective, we've got the texts from Voss, direct orders to Cutler about eliminating obstacles. She's going down too." In the days that followed, justice rolled through Cedar Bluff like a cleansing storm. Marta Voss's perfectly manicured hands were cuffed as federal agents led her from her corporate office. Her indictment made headlines. Water rights conspiracy exposed. Deputy Kersey turned in his badge, his reputation in tatters after evidence revealed years of covering up Cutler's crimes. At the preliminary hearing, Greer sat tall in the witness box, her testimony clear and unwavering. Buck lay at her feet, his gray muzzle resting on his paws as Cutler glared from the defendant's table. The mountain of evidence against him. Rory's recording, Voss's incriminating texts, and dozens of victims coming forward, ensured he wouldn't threaten anyone again. Back at her homestead, spring water bubbled fresh and clean, now legally protected by ironclad documentation. The land that had been in her family for generations would stay that way. Buck's limp was permanent, but his spirit remained unbroken. He followed Greer everywhere, their bond forged in fire and strengthened by survival. One morning, as dawn painted the mountains gold, Greer stood on her porch with Rory's old Halligan bar in her hands. The firefighting tool was heavy with memory and meaning. She mounted it carefully above her door, a symbol of protection, of Rory's legacy, and of her own hard-won strength. Detective Larkin, Amos now, joined her on the porch, his presence familiar and comforting. When he reached for her hand, she took it without hesitation. They weren't victim and protector anymore, but equals who had fought for justice together. Buck pressed against her leg, his tail wagging as he gazed up at her with those wise amber eyes. Greer smiled, feeling the weight of grief and fear finally lifting. The spring gurgled its ancient song, and the morning air held the promise of new beginnings, ones built on courage, loyalty, and love. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.